Hello and welcome. My name is Heather Gonzago and I'm here with my colleague Kelly Hutchins, and we're going to discuss a little bit about how you can go in and create a better UX with your pop-ups using the JavaScript API. So before we even get started, I do want to mention that all of our slides and any demonstrations that we create will be accessible on my GitHub repo. Here's a short URL that points to this. If you don't remember this, or later on down the line you don't have access to these to this presentation, mainly if you just do a Google search for Heather Gonzago or H Gonzago on GitHub, you will get a link then to all of the Dev Summit presentations for this year and previous years as well. So you'll see here we have the link to the slides in addition to the link to the demos. Okay, so I'm assuming that most of you probably have worked with pop-ups before if you're listening to this, but just as a general refresher, mainly just when we talk about pop-ups, pop-ups are there to provide a user, it's there to provide the user with a way to interact with the map to get information back to them specific to a feature that they're looking at. So usually what you'll see is that the pop-up is going to respond to your mouse click. So it's going to take whatever X and Y coordinates that you click on within your map and run, basically under the hood, runs a query on that and then brings back any underlying attribute data. So you can get information on, feature attributes, whether, if you're working in a feature layer, you can get to that. If you're working if you need to get the location, you can actually get the X and the Y information back from that screen location that you clicked on within that map as well. In addition to that, let's say, for example, you're using the search widget. You can go in, click or type in an area to search on, and that resulting feature that comes back, you can have a pop-up configured for that as well and have that automatically display based upon whatever you search. Okay, so just an overview. Keep those things in mind. And then from here on out, we're also going to talk a bit on how you can customize and make this pop-up specific to how you need it for your application. All right, so when we talk about the pop-up itself within the JavaScript API, you need to remember that within the API, so we have our view, and the view automatically has a reference. It has a default instance of the pop-up, so we can get a reference to our pop-up directly off of that view. Now, if you want to go in and get the underlying attribute information from maybe like a layer, a feature layer, let's say, this is where you can actually go in and work with a feature layer's associated pop-up template. So if we take a look and open up the pop-up template here within the SDK documentation, underneath the API reference, you'll see here we have our pop-up template and all of the properties and methods that go with it. And you can see here, just based upon the amount of information, there's quite a bit. And then lastly, we can position how we want our pop-up to display within our application by using dock options. So within the pop-up widget itself, there is the ability to set the dock options and whether or not you want the pop-up to be able to be dockable or not. Okay, so before we even really get into the nitty-gritty on some of this stuff, let's just take a really quick look at the pop-up tutorial that we have directly within our developer site. So I'm going to go ahead, just open that up. And what you'll see here within our developer site, we have a ton of tutorials that were created for basic things, adding layers, editing data, and so forth. One of them is specific to working and displaying a pop-up. So this is a really good one, actually, if you've never done this before. Basically, it allows you to go in here and if we click on one of these points within this feature layer, we should see here we have this pop-up that's been configured to show the name of what we're looking at. So it's basically, it's a trailhead, the name of that, so whatever, California Coastal Trail, and then some additional field information as well. So that's a good one to start off with. Just, you know, if you're brand new to all of this and just kind of want to get your feet wet, go ahead and take a look at that pop-up tutorial. All right, so we talked about, you know, we have the pop-up that's off of the view. And then if you want to configure the pop-up, actual pop-up content, we have the pop-up template that we have off of a feature layer on. Okay, so if we go back in here, we'll notice here in the pop-up template, you're going to want to go in and set a title. In addition to that, you're also going to want to go in and set the content. Okay, so you can set the content all at once, or what you generally will see now is that you'll have the content which can be broken up into various types or content types, various elements. So we have 5 different types. We have text, which is just, like it says, like basic text. We can add media, which is if you're working with like charts. We have fields, so you can specify and tell it exactly what fields that you want to have shown from your data. So, you know, you might have a really huge underlying data set on that layer, but you only really need to know or see like 2 or 3 fields. You can specify that here. You can also say, hey, I have an attachment that's associated with this feature as well, and I want that attachment to be able to be clicked on and displayed. So you can set that attachment content. And then lastly, our newest form of pop-up element is a custom content. And that basically is just as it says, it allows you to go in and do a little bit mix and match. So you can basically, within one pop-up content element, you can set various types all together, so, or various elements all together. So you can throw maybe like a widget, throw some a formatted text string, and I'll show you in just a brief moment here what one of those actually looks like. Okay, so I just briefly went about the different types of content element types. So let's go ahead and actually take a look at these in a little bit more detail. So we talked a little bit about, you know, we have the text and the media and the fields. I first want to go ahead and touch upon the fields content. So if we take a look at this, what we'll notice here, and this is just a little example, this is what it would display within within your pop-up. So in this case, we are showing 2 fields and that associated values for those fields for this feature. So basically, all we would need to do is we would specify, in this case, we have 2 fields that we're showing. So we have 2 field infos, and then we tell it the name and how we want it to be labeled. We pass that field info into our fields content, and then pass that content into the pop-up template. So if we take a quick look here, I want to go in and I'm going to show you an example of how this actually works. So what we have here is, it's a data layer, point data layer of female-owned businesses within the Los Angeles area. So what we have is we've got 2 fields. We have our address field and we have the industry field. In addition to that, so we're working with fields content right here. So that part's the fields content. In addition to that, we also have another element, the text element here. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to quickly show you the code behind this and what we are actually doing. Okay, So if we take a look here, you'll notice that we have the pop-up template. And in addition to this, we are also using Arcade, which is basically, we're not going to go into too much detail on Arcade within this particular session, but just think of it, it's just a way to allow us to do, it allows us to run logic on certain expressions to see how we want to display specific things within our pop-up. So what we have is we are creating a new template. We're passing in the title, which is the name of, it's the actual field name, which is called name. And then here in the content, all I'm doing is I can do it a couple different ways. I can pass in an actual field content similar to what we have here and what this little snippet shows. Or what I could do is I can actually go in and just set the type to fields. So it's the same exact thing. You can either set the type to fields or pass in the actual field content. I set the type to fields, I pass in the field information, so I have two fields that I'm showing, the address and the industry. So that's my one content type. And then the second type I'm using is text. So just a basic text field or text content. And in this case, I'm telling, hey, I want you to use this Arcade expression that I wrote down here within the expression info called has website. And based upon certain conditions, if that feature that I clicked on has a value in the field called website, go ahead and show me the associated website for that feature. If it doesn't, just go ahead and tell me there's no website found for it. And that's it. So basically what I have here is I'm creating this custom content or custom pop-up template content for this feature layer. And if we take a look, you'll notice here, this is where I instantiate the feature layer, and the pop-up template, I'm passing in the template that I created right here. So based off of this, what I passed in, it will now go ahead, configure and set that pop-up template to show only these two addresses, and then run these and provide this text information based upon these Arcade expressions. Okay, so that was just basic text content, fields content. Let's say you want to go ahead and show some attachments. So we actually have a ton of good information or good samples here within our developer site. If you take a look under the sample code and on the left-hand side underneath where it says pop-ups, there's a ton of pop-up samples that are written and displayed here. This is a good one because it really shows the basic premise for working with the four top content types. We have the text, the attachments, the media, and the fields. So what we have here is basically all I want to show you is we go in, this is Beverly Hills, I believe it's Beverly Hills tree, and take a look, and if I click on this, you'll see here I have some fields that are being shown. I've got a really crazy colorful chart, a pie chart that's being shown. If I page through this, you can also see I have some associated images as well that are associated with that feature. And then if I scroll down, you'll also notice that there is an attachment element as well that's associated with this. So we have a JPEG attachment that is associated with this feature within this feature layer. If I click on this, it goes ahead and it brings it on up. So if we took a look at the actual code behind this, you'll notice here that in our content, we have the same thing. We've got our fields content type, and we're specifying the fields that we're working with. And then we've got the text. So we had where it basically went in there and it gave us the amount of trees within each census block. We also have our media types. So in this case, we're passing in two types of media within the media info. That is our pie chart and the image. So those two types. And then lastly, all I need to do to show attachments is to just say, hey, I want to pass in this type as attachments, it automatically will look at the feature layer. If that feature layer has attachments associated with it, it will bring and show that attachment if there is one associated with the clicked on feature that's being displayed within that pop-up. We have our custom content. So if we take a look at this, basically, it's just like it says, it allows you to customize this so you can combine elements, whether you're working with like an HTML element, just like some divs, a widget, you want to return a promise, string, whatever it may be. So if we take a look at this sample here for the custom content, you'll notice that if I go in and, let's zoom in a little bit, click on Pennsylvania, you'll see here, I actually have I have a few things in here. I have a search widget, and I have some custom content that was, that's actually, it's doing a little bit of calculations behind the scenes to get the information that's needed to show some averages. So if I went in here, let's just say I don't want to zoom back out of my map, I can go in here, do that search. It doesn't have to be the search widget, it can basically be any widget. And then from there, it's going to update this based upon whatever feature it is that I'm searching on. So if we take a look at that code, we have our search widget, so we are setting that. This custom content, okay? So the custom content, the main thing to keep in mind when using this is we have a creator property, which basically is where you would pass in this function that is where you would set and specify what you want to have created and set within your custom content for this pop-ups element. Okay, so with all of that being said, I'm going to go ahead and pass this over to Kelly, where she will talk some more about working with pop-ups and configuring and styling them.
Heather, that was great information. So Heather showed us how to explain what a pop-up was and the pieces of the pop-up and how to define pop-up content using JavaScript. But you can also create pop-ups in ArcGIS Online and have them just work in your JavaScript code. So let's look at this example application. I think we have it open right here. So here we have an application that's showing a web map that was created in ArcGIS Online. It has pop-ups that were also defined in ArcGIS Online. These pop-ups have some text information, and then they'll display attachments, a picture of Bubba the cat. Another one, if we look here, is the Esri Cafe. So it has some images of the cafe and what it looks like, as well as a PDF menu of the attachment. So this was built in ArcGIS Online using the ArcGIS Online map viewer, and you can define the pop-ups there. You can get them looking the way you want with the interactive tools without writing code. So somebody in your organization who's really good with design and setting up the pop-ups could come in, use the tools and the capabilities in the map viewer to define the pop-up for the content in your web map and then save it. And then you can use that web map in applications and you just get these customized pop-ups for free. So they just come across. You don't have to write all the JavaScript code to define the various content types. If you want to, you can look at the web map JSON. So here's the JSON for this particular web map. And you can see all the pop-up information is stored here with the web map. So you could take this and rewrite it in JavaScript using the techniques that Heather showed you. You could define your field infos. You could enable the attachments, choose the display type, set all of those properties in JavaScript using the information you get from the web map JSON. So let's look at, or you can just use the web map ID. So here's an example of a sample from the JavaScript SDK. This is for the legend widget. It shows that it's using a web map. We've given it the web map ID. There's a little bit of code in here, but no code for defining the pop-ups. We just have the web map. So when we click on one of these features, we can see that we get that pop-up as it was defined in the web map with the chart and descriptive text. So you can save yourself some typing by using a web map. actions are another really useful component of the pop-ups. These are custom actions that you can add to the area of the pop-up next to the default action, which is the zoom to capability. So there's a couple of samples in the help I wanted to point out. The first is this single pop-up action, where here we have an action that lets you measure the particular selected line. So we click measure and it returns the length of that line. So let's look in the sample code and see how that action was created. We can see in our code that we have this object that has a title. That's going to be the title of this pop-up action. So if we hover over it, we can see there's the title measure length. It has an ID, a way we can reference this action through code. And then it has the URL, in this case to an image. There's also an option to specify an icon instead if that's what you have. Then we're going to create our new pop-up template. This is auto-casting as a pop-up template, but it's a pop-up template where we specified the title, the content, and then we add the action, this custom action, this measure this action that we created up here. So then we have an event called trigger action on the pop-up that we listen for. This fires each time an action in the action bar is executed, so either zoom or measure. So these actions each have an ID. We define the ID for our action as measure this. So we can listen for that event, check to see if it's the ID for the measure action, and then we can execute this function, measure this, which uses the geometry engine to get the geodesic length of that selected line. So that's one example of working with pop-up actions. We can also have actions that work on a per feature basis. So this one is a custom pop-up, but not every feature, it's going to add a custom action, but not every feature has an action. Now I've got to find one. So, okay, here's one. So some of these this is a brewery map, a map with a bunch of breweries listed on it. Some of them have an actual website that you can link out to. So we've created an action that only appears when there is a website property that's filled out. If there is, we add this action. It's got its own custom logo image on it, and then we click on it, it'll take us to the website for, in this case, the Breckenridge Brewery. So let's look at that code in the sandbox really quickly. So we can see we have an action. The action is called Find Brewery, custom image, and we have a title for it. But I mentioned that this is a per feature action. So here we have a watch on our pop-up for when a feature is selected. And if the feature is selected, we look and see if it has this website attribute. If it does, we make that action visible. If it doesn't, we don't. So this could be useful if you were creating various types of tools that maybe work on certain geometries. So if you wanted to display an elevation profile, have an action that displays an elevation profile, you could only have it display if the feature type, the geometry type was polylines. If it's points, there's no elevation profile, so you wouldn't want that action to be in the action bar because it wouldn't make sense. So you could check for geometries that are of type polyline, and then you could enable or set that action to be visible. So this is a really useful option for working with actions. And there's this samples from the SDK, so you can find it in there. The third one is sort of just another example of the usefulness of actions. This is one where it's an editable feature layer. So we have an edit feature action. When we click on it, it brings up the attribute editor so we can edit various features in this particular feature layer. So we'll just look at that source code really quickly. You'll see that it's the same idea. We create our action by specifying the title, the ID. In this case, we're using the class name to an available Esri icon edit. So let's see how that looks. This is this pencil icon that appears. And then we have the rest of the logic for you know, setting up the editor, the attribute editing capabilities. And when somebody clicks on the edit action, we run this particular code that displays that attribute editor. So that sample is also worth looking through in the help. It's got some good information. The feature widget I find really useful. I use it all the time when building applications. A lot of times we want access to the pop-up template content. We don't want to rebuild the pop-up template, but we don't want to display that template content in the standard pop-up that appears when you click on a map feature. Maybe we want to put that pop-up template content someplace else. Like in the example here, we have it in a side panel. Or maybe in a separate window, like a tooltip that appears when you hover. If you only have a little bit of information in your pop-up template, hover capability might work well. Or you want to create two kinds of areas where you can look at the pop-up template content for two features side by side. So you can do all of that using the feature widget, and this fetch features method is helpful when you're building applications like that. So this method, this is the API reference for it. It returns any features that are at a given screen location. So it gets all the features from all the layer views in that view at that particular location that you specify. So it gets the pop-up template information, and then you can use it with the feature widget to display that content in a side panel, for example. So I think we have a link to a sample from the help here that uses the feature widget. So this map has, it says imagery and feature layers, and all layers have a pop-up template. So when we click on those, instead of displaying the pop-up here over the map, we're displaying that content in the side panel. So this is an example of using that feature widget. Let's view the page source. There's one extra step that you need to do, potentially need to do if you want to display that pop-up content someplace else. You probably don't want to display it on the map itself. So when you create the map view, you can set this pop-up auto and open enabled to false, because we don't want that default pop-up to show up. We're going to show that pop-up content in another location. So here, we have the call to fetch features. So we listen for the maps click event. Then we call fetch features, passing in that click event location. And then we can deal with the response, like looking through all the layer view responses, getting that pop-up template information. That's what all this code is doing, is creating the way that we want to display it that's not the pop-up. And then we use the feature widget that's available in the API. We pass in that graphic, and then we're going to display the pop-up template for that graphic in that location that we specify. So it's worth looking through this sample, taking some time to read through this and understand exactly what's happening. But in this case, here's what's happening. We click, gets all the features, we build these this side panel area, and we display the pop-up template content using the feature widget in this side panel. And we've turned off the pop-up on the map so we don't get duplicate displays. Now let's look at how we can style the pop-up. Out of the box, there are themes available to us. So we have this sample in the help that we can explore in the sandbox that shows the out-of-the-box dark theme that's available. The standard that we look at when we look at a pop-up is the light theme. So the way you get the dark theme, is by pointing to the dark style sheet. Their light, as I mentioned, is what you see most often in the samples in the SDK. There are also additional style sheets available, so you can play around with these. Like if we wanted to look at dark red, you can see here's the dark red dark red theme. I find the light and dark themes to be the most useful and the most commonly used. So here they are. You can also, let's look at this, this large. Sometimes you want to make additional changes to it just through CSS in your application. There's tools available in the developer tools where you can inspect the CSS and then you could make individual changes in your application. Like if you wanted to just change, let me go to the go to the styles here. I can inspect an element, maybe in the pop-up. Maybe for some reason I want this close icon to be blue. We can see here that it's blue. If I want these temporary changes that I'm making in the developer tools, I could then copy this change into my source code, and they'd be permanent. But you can come here in the developer tools and make changes temporarily to see things the way the way you'd like them to look. Get it looking the way you like, and then you could copy this over into your CSS style sheet and make the changes. So that's nice. The other thing that I wanted to point out is that you don't have to show all the elements in the pop-up. Sometimes you might want to create a pop-up that has certain capabilities disabled. So there's this visible elements option on the pop-up that lets you turn off individual elements of the widget's display. So the feature navigation is one and the close button is another. So you can set those to false if you want to. And if you do that, you could turn off this close button so your pop-ups aren't closable until somebody clicks someplace else or clicks on another feature. And you can also turn off the multiple features. So if you have, I don't think this example has it, but if you have one that has multiple features underneath the cursor, you'll see the feature navigation here. You could turn that off if for some reason you only wanted people to be looking at one feature instead of all the features underneath it. So thank you so much for attending this session. Please, we appreciate the feedback. So if you can use the session survey link below the video to fill it out, that would be fantastic. And I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference.